Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live in Washington, D.C. And in the studio with me, Jamie Weinstein, political commentator and host of the Jamie Weinstein Show, which is available as a podcast over at iTunes. And, of course, his website, Jamie Weinstein, Weinstein.com, Jamie Weinstein.com. And, Jamie, it's been a long time since we've talked. In fact, I think I've said this to you on the air before. And I said it to you just a few minutes ago. I've always thought of you as more of a William F. Buckley conservative than one of these kind of crazed reactionaries, for lack of a better phrase. I don't know how you would describe some of your colleagues who are, you know, on the kind of Steve Bannon right, but
populists. I think they're populist. But I take it as a great compliment, by the way. William F. Buckley is a great hero. I don't want to say hero of mine, but someone I've always looked up to and read. Yeah,
and I had tremendous respect for him too. My dad and I used to watch his show every week, and that was the grist for many of our debates. So here we have President. It's so hard for me to say this. Here we have this man, Mr. Trump, who is about to occupy the White House, and he during the primary and during the general election, he took the position that it's time to stop basically giving our jobs away, you know, to bring our jobs home. I wrote a book called Rebooting the American Dream back in 2010, I think it was. And Bernie, in fact, wrote a cover letter for the book and hand-delivered it, not him himself, but, you know, we had a person do this, to the other 99 members of the Senate, saying, you need to read this book. And the book opens with Alexander Hamilton and his 11-point plan on manufacturers and, you know, laying out mercantilism and, you know, how we would borrow this basically from, I think it was George the Fourth or Seventh or something, whoever it was, in the 1600s, you know, when the British were practicing that. And of course, it goes all the way back to the Romans. And it built a great nation, protectionism. And then this neoliberal idea of so-called free trade really took hold during the George Herbert Walker Bush administration. He negotiated the first NAFTA agreement. Reagan talked about it, gave it lip service, and we've seen, you know, tariffs collapse since then. And all of the countries that we compete with, and I'm talking about like Germany, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, China, they all replaced their tariffs with VAT taxes. So, for example, if I want to make a car in the United States and sell it into Germany, I have to pay a 17% VAT tax at the border of Germany, value-added tax, because Germans have to pay VAT tax on German-made cars. On the other hand, if Germany wants to export a German-manufactured car into the United States, they can deduct 17% from the price because Americans aren't supposed to pay German VAT taxes. And that's, you know, all these countries all around the world are doing this, and we got no VAT tax, and we've got no tariffs. These are effective tariffs. First of all, what are your thoughts on this? And secondly, well, let's start with that.
It sounds like you're a Trump fan, to be honest. I mean, I know there's some reasons why you would dislike Donald Trump. I think a lot of those reasons are obvious. But this is an issue I think you would probably fall in line with Donald Trump.
I have been saying this since in the primaries he started saying this. This is an area where Donald Trump and I agree. The question is, there's a big difference between changing trade policy and doing a PR stunt with Carrier.
Yeah, well, I oppose both. So I oppose the idea of his trade policy, and I especially oppose the PR stuff he's been doing with Carrier and whatnot. I am a student of Milton Friedman, I wasn't his actual student, but someone who's read his works, and I believe him to be one of the great economists.
Did you look at the damage that he did to Chile and to Russia?
I've been to Chile. I see Chile as the wealthiest country in South America.
After they stopped Friedmanism.
I do not think he did damage to Chile.
No, he was the sponsor of Pinochet. They killed people over Milton Friedman's idea to do away with Social Security in Chile.
So I don't know what your question is. Was Pinochet a dictator like we have had dictators in Latin America and elsewhere? Yes. But he also happened to be, unlike a lot of those other dictators, a free market person, which is why Chile is the shining city in South America today as the most economically prosperous country in South America.
It's also one of the most liberal. It had up until recently, Michelle Bachelet had a very progressive president.
Is it really? I haven't studied in a while, but when I was there, I asked about Social Security, and they
brought it back.
They do not have a robust social state, as far as I remember. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's
brought it
changed.
back. I mean, that's
it was wealthy when I was there, and when
that's
they
what
didn't.
she was elected on. But without debating Chile, let's talk about the United States.
Yeah, so I guess I'm with Milton Friedman, where he says on free trade, they have people who are against it. Are for special interests as opposed to the general interests. There's special interests that can point to damage that is done with free trade in a way. You can point to a factory being closed down, and it's easy to demagogue, and Donald Trump is the king of that, even better than Bernie Sanders, I think. But the general interest doesn't always have a strong supporter, because it's sometimes harder to see the positive effects or to point to jobs that would have been gained if you impose tariffs that wouldn't be. For instance, just look at, tariffs is basically a tax on you and me. Pencils are very cheap. That's a famous example of Milton Friedman, because you can trade with other countries around the world. With tariffs, pencils might cost $10 a pencil. I don't think
when I was a kid and we had tariffs. I used pencils throughout school.
Yeah,
they were cheap, and they were made in the United States.
There's always been some form of tariff. There was a George W. Bush put some tariffs on steel.
We still have tariffs, but it's just that our average tariff right now is 1.2%.
But I do think that the declining nature of our trade barriers is good and is prosperous. And America has a lot of faults, and it really does. But yet, still people around the world see it as the economy of last resort. They put their money here. They must think that.
But lacking a VAT tax to equalize, I mean, this is sort of like the argument about the so-called free market. And this is where I have an argument with Friedman and those who preceded him, Mises and whatnot.
But let's add that, though. You have an argument not only with Milton Friedman in a way, but you do have an argument, and that does not make it determinative, with most economists, because that's an 80-90% issue, believing free trade among economists is good for the country and the world.
Today. Yeah, you're right. Today. But if you went back 40 years ago, it would have been a very different issue.
I think Paul Krugman probably would agree on
in
trade.
Fact, I debated free trade with Paul Krugman on an Air America cruise about 10 years ago.
Yeah. So I'm just saying it's no longer
no, you're
necessarily
right.
a partisan
I'm outside
issue.
the mainstream.
Yeah.
And arguably so
make you
is Donald
wrong,
Trump. But the key to a market being functional is that there's equality on both sides, that you have the same information that I have, that you have the same power that I have, that if we're going to engage in a competitive marketplace or in trade, and I've never been able to understand how a country where the average wage, I mean, this is why Germany protects themselves with a VAT tax. The average wage in Germany is $54 an hour in US dollars. And the average wage in China is what, $1.50 an hour? And it used to be 30 cents. How do you compete when you have these huge disparities? The only benefit, it seems, is to the multinational corporations. Apple's sitting on what, $100 billion, overseas because of cheap labor overseas.
I think another product, you're worried about wages, and I think anyone hopes that wages rise, especially for middle-class workers who are struggling. But one other consequences of tariffs, I think, will be automation will only go more rapidly, because as wages rise, companies have more incentive to automate. Have you been to the CVSs around here? I don't really have to go to the checkout counter anymore. I can do it on my own with their little machine that they have there.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what tripped up George Herbert Walker Bush when he. I mean, that's been around for a while.
Those that you needed back when you're talking about when he was campaigning and he didn't know what this machine was. But now you can just go on your own at a CVS without any person helping you at all.
No, I understand that, and I get that the robots are coming is the new slogan. I don't see an association between the two. Somebody's got to make those machines. Somebody's got to service those machines. Somebody's got to program those machines. Right now, those machines. Machines that are being used in CVS are being manufactured in China. I can't say that with absolute certainty, but I would bet $50. That if they're not made in China, they're made in Germany. That they're probably not made in the United States, because we're just not making things here other than military hardware. But, basically the major export of the United States last year was refined petroleum products and military products. That's all we make anymore. And you can't maintain, I mean, any country that goes below 15% manufacturing, and we've been below 15% manufacturing since the early 90s, anytime that happens, you start seeing the middle class collapse.
But our exports are actually are not going down.
They've increased. Our exports are because we're exporting wood.
Because automation
our major exports are wood from the Pacific Northwest going to China. They're going to China to be made into the cardboard that wraps the packages around the finished goods that are shipped back to the United States. When Reagan came into office, we were the world's largest importer of raw materials and exporter of finished goods. By the time George Herbert Walker Bush left office, we had flipped. We had become the world's largest importer of finished goods and the world's largest exporter of raw materials.
I'm not sure why that's a measure of economic success or
because detriment. You don't build a middle class shipping coal or shipping oil or shipping wood out of your country.
Why not?
Because it's an extractive economy. Extractive economies are
I think those are good jobs. I think we need other jobs too, but I think those are fine jobs.
I don't think being a coal miner is a good job. I think working in a factory, I think making things.
Coal miner's a very tough job. I'm not gonna argue there, saying that's something most people aspire to be. They deserve a lot of respect.
To all kinds of poisonous compounds. But you haven't answered my question.
Which is,
this is Adam Smith's argument. Adam Smith's argument, if you read Wealth of Nations, and I'm guessing you probably have, so you know where I'm going with this, is that if you have. If England, as I recall, the example he used, and it's been 30 years since I read the book, but it might have been in Theory of Moral Sentiments, but I'm pretty sure it was in Wealth of Nations, was that if England is making, England is making wool, we've got a lot of sheep, and France is making wine, and the third country, I think it might have been Ireland, is making great cheese because they've got cows, then...
Comparative advantage.
Well, it wasn't comparative advantage as much as none of us are really good at making... The other two nations are not good at making any one of those things. In other words, each one of these three nations does have a comparative advantage relative to that particular product. So therefore, there's a good argument for trade among those three countries. But what happens when two of those countries both start making cheese? What happens when all three countries start making cheese? Then the urge to trade can become actually destructive to a country rather than constructive, because you're diluting your own internal markets.
I don't believe that trade. It's rarely a bad thing. But
you haven't given me an answer to the inequality of, for example, just labor prices. You're saying
because China has cheaper labor than America.
China, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia.
Mexico. It's funny. I was listening just to Milton Friedman a second ago, and he says even if the others don't come up to our standard, we should still continue to trade. And it's
not our job to bring them up to our standard.
It's impossible to suggest that China is going to have overnight the same kind of wages that we have in the United States. But you're suggesting that we have a kind of a.
I'm not saying they should. I'm actually the wages in the United States have collapsed. I mean, household wages are the same as they were when Reagan came into office.
They're not China.
Individual wages are down by 30 or 40%.
I just see different view than you of how the economy has gone over the last 30, 40 years. There's no question there are problems. But we still are the beacon of the world when it comes to economics. People still want to come here. And what you're suggesting, no, let's be clear. What you're suggesting is that by putting tariffs on, you're actually going to put a tax on most of these middle-class people that you claim to help. Now, there might be some people...
Which opens opportunities for entrepreneurs like me. I've started 7 businesses. If there's a tariff on pencils coming into the United States, I'm going to open a damn pencil factory.
There might be some people that are helped. There's no question by your policy. We can visibly see where they've been harmed. Again, Bernie Sanders campaigned there, so did Donald Trump, and they kind of held up that image and said we're going to bring these jobs back. But most people, the general welfare, as Milton Friedman will say, are probably going to be harmed because it's going to be a tax on them.
Then why was that a time of prosperity and this is a time of economic collapse?
I don't think this is a time of economic collapse.
Okay, all right. We'll have to leave it at that because we're hitting the break here. Jamie Weinstein, political commentator, host of the Jamie Weinstein Show podcast. As a conservative, it's a brilliant one. You can find it at iTunes. Jamie, hang on just a second here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And JamieWeinstein.com and Jamie_Weinstein or at Jamie_. Jamie, thanks for dropping.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, Tom.